Out there? Okay, fantastic. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Salt Lake City. Hope you had uneventful travels getting here and looking forward to a great week. I have the privilege of running the panel today, really getting down to the brass tacks of where are we with AI? Right, let's get past the hype and talking about what is it that we're doing, what is it that we're learning, and how are we trying to prepare for ourselves for that future. You all met Stephen in his presentation here from Georgia Tech. I'd also like to introduce Shawna Dark, the Chief Academic Technology Officer at UC Berkeley, and Ryan Lufkin, Vice President of Global Academic Strategy at Instructure, who brings importance of not just higher education, but also what goes on in the K-12 community around the conversation around AI. So welcome all of you today. Okay, so just for a little bit of format. So we've got some questions. We're going to start off with the panel here. But as we've learned, especially on the topic of AI, there's a lot of thoughts and questions. So about halfway through this, I'm going to bring the microphone to you. And I mean literally, I'm bringing a microphone to you. So start thinking about what questions you'd ask this esteemed panel. And we're going to have a little fun running around, and I'm going to play game show host. But I'm going to start with you all here and say, okay, this is an evolving topic, as Stephen said. What are you doing at your institutions now? And what are the key learnings that are coming out of all of these current activities? Shawna, we're going to start with you.
Great, thank you. So Berkeley is a very interesting place. It's a highly decentralized campus. Can you all hear me back there okay? All right, good, excellent. So it's a highly decentralized campus. So a lot of people have asked me, have you started governance? No, we've not started governance, because that's something that just takes a long time and a lot of relationship building and that kind of thing to happen at Berkeley. So instead what we've done is we've established several communities of practice, one that is for the entire campus, and then another that is sort of a subset of that that's focused on research, teaching, and learning. Our Provost has also established what we're calling the PAC AI, which is the Provost Advisory Committee on AI, which consists of myself, our CIO, our Chief Research Technology Officer, our Chief Technology Officer, we have a lot of chiefs, and some faculty from the Academic Senate, as well as experts on AI from Berkeley. And so those are kind of the main structures that we have in place right now. Just like everyone else, we went through a period of hysteria and people wanting to ban AI from our campus. And now what we're seeing is faculty are actually starting to experiment with AI. And in particular in this last semester, that's really where we saw faculty sharing ideas around what they were learning from AI. Looking forward, we definitely will be looking at developing incentive programs where faculty are incentivized to participate in both literacy around AI, but also in sharing out their own research associated with AI. So,
Stephen, you mentioned 3 AI institutes, right, or focus, organizational entities at Georgia Tech. How is the institution eating its own dog food? How's that going?
Well, we're actually very similar to UC Berkeley. The AI institutes are national AI institutes comprised of different universities. We did a symposium a few months ago, just internal to Georgia Tech, to find out what's going on with AI. We have over 500 people doing research in AI right now. And they're going so fast and moving so quickly, we're not trying to govern it so much. Our spirit is infused with entrepreneurship and innovation, and we realized from the beginning that's going to be the case. So we're saying, hey, let's use our academic standards that we have, and you can't plagiarize. You can't cheat when you're not allowed other resources. Acknowledge what you're doing with AI, but it's going so fast, and we're still not trying to govern it as such. What we do though, we're looking at the back end, and so we're finding tasks that are not necessarily teaching and learning tasks that can benefit from AI. So some of our HR things, we're moving to AI. Some of our admissions decisions and things, we're not using AI strictly for admissions yet, but we're using it to help evaluate the different pools. So a lot of our back systems are using AI.
What can you tell us about the K-12 community, right, and kind of where their experimentation is going?
Yeah, in my role I get to travel around the globe and actually talk to K-12 institutions, universities, and what's interesting is there's a massive divide, and I think like you were pointing out, universities have moved kind of beyond the hysteria and are moving into looking at productive uses and things like that. K-12 largely, I think it's a lack of resources, is falling behind. And I loved your slides on the human nature, because I think if you survived the 1980s, you realize that we were all conditioned to fear AI. Blade Runner came out in 1982, evil AI run amok. 1983 was War Games. Walper wanted to play global thermonuclear war. And 1984 was Terminator, right? We were conditioned to fear AI. So when AI got here, we were scared to death. We extrapolated what the outcome would be, which was the end of the world. And I think in a lot of ways, K-12 educators still have that in mind. It is a cheating tool. We can't move beyond it. So we spend a lot of our time really talking to schools and school districts about just go out and experiment with the tools, use the public-facing tools, because when you do, you're much more likely to have a positive outcome. You understand their shortcomings, their potential, even to the point where you can identify yourself when text is written by AI. I can write AI that will trick an AI detector into thinking it was AI, because you understand the patterns, but because I've used it enough, right? So we've got to get those educators out there. And I see with my own kids, my daughter's a freshman at the University of Utah, and her professors are making it part of the process of learning. You know, where to start, get words on paper, summarize large topics. My son, who's in junior high, his educators aren't talking about it. It's cheating, don't use it. At the same time, if they are using it, they're using it to write, and at the same time the educators are using it, and they don't want students to use it, which is an unfair imbalance. And my fear is that because they're not teaching students how to use it at that early level, we've got a wave of students that they're already out there using it. My son knows how to generate images and generate text. They're going to hit college, and it'll be a bit of a free-for-all as we try to enforce these rules on them. So.
Along those lines, Ryan, so on our web page, our admissions web page, we encourage students to use AI to write their applications. We want them to tell us that they did it, and also, though, really focus on the process that they went through to do it. So I think you're right, we could get a real divide.
Treating prompt writing as a skill.
It's a skill.
Because it is, yeah.
I know for us, we had a couple of learnings, right? So we saw this as a transformational step, like the internet was, a generation ago. And so, we set up focus teams and saying, how's it going to change instruction? How is it going to change campus operations? How is it going to change research? And the incredible adoption of these tools also in the research. And then, of course, we also have a health enterprise. And then, that concept of what I experienced myself was everyone's got to experience this to learn, to wrap their head around what it means, right? And then they start to play with it and figure out what's my own personal productivity hack. And then I want to get a little comfortable with that. Then I figure out, now I'm going to try to actually use it. And then if they start getting comfortable and using it and seeing value, then they start thinking about it as a habit and say, now I can replace a task. So the question is, at a large, diverse institution, how do you facilitate that for everyone? And so we came out, one of the things that we did to try to get more players on the playing field was we came up with our own curated GPT model. Now, it wasn't like we were trying to compete with OpenAI or Google or anyone, but we just were responding to the two most prominent responses for why people hadn't started playing yet. They said, well, I hear my data's not safe if I put it in there, and I hear that it's not privacy protecting. So we gave them a version that could take care of those two things, and what we saw was exponential experimentation. And so now we're harnessing off the experimentation. But for many organizations, both higher ed and K-12, we still have large populations that are struggling with, kind of just stepping onto the playing field. Fear, anxiety, concerns about privacy. How are you engaging groups into those conversations to kind of get it on the table and then help everyone kind of come and reconcile it with their own mind? Maybe Stephen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think our problem is always not thinking about that because everybody wants to charge forward. So one of the things we've been having to do is try to do some education about privacy and about data protection. So we partner with Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. We have a strong relationship with them anyway. And so we do have our internal instance of Copilot where the data stays internal to Georgia Tech. So on the one hand, we've kind of worked with the system to take away that as a risk. But in terms of getting the non-Georgia Tech folks to do it, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And I think we try to get out to things like this as much as we can and talk about the benefits outweigh the risks, I think.
As a vendor, I think one of the biggest things for us is building trust. We've adopted the metaphor of a nutritional facts card. So whether it's our AI features or our LTI partners and their AI features, we encourage them to build a nutritional facts card that says, we use this large language model, we do not learn from student data, it's hosted on AWS, it's right, it has all that material so that you can compare those tools like you would a cereal box and understand what you're getting more transparently. So that's one way to build that trust so that schools can decide to use or not use those features.
So I'm curious, like, what kind of reactions do you get to that? I mean, I've heard that idea one or two places before, so now getting a chance to talk to someone who's doing it, what are people's reactions? What kind of questions do they come back with?
Well, by and large, it's the concerns that you talked about before. Where's this data go? I don't, there was a great quote, and I apologize, can't remember her name, but she said, AI could be 3 raccoons in a trench coat. We just don't know, right? And so giving a little bit of transparency and at least understanding where does it live, what data does it have access to, those kind of things help people have a little more trust in engaging with them. And so far our vendors have hopped at it, right? The partners want to provide that. And schools have said, we have a trust relationship with you in structure, we don't necessarily have a trust relationship with the tool partner standing behind you, we want that transparency.
Yeah, there was an interesting statistic that came out, I think it was 2 weeks ago, talking about where will people look for trust in kind of use of AI. You can imagine it was in the low teens for the big tech companies, but it was basically right around 50% when talking about educational institutions. I think the general public is looking for educational institutions because there's still high levels of trust in that. There's integrity around the things that we do, so that they're looking to us to provide those types of guideposts or nutritional labels.
And one of the things we say too is there's, like any new technology, there's this call for regulation. And what we say is, we don't need new regulation, we need to eat our vegetables, right? We have security, data privacy, and accessibility requirements that already exist. We need to make these tools that we're using align to those existing requirements. So if we eat our vegetables, again, that nutritional facts metaphor, we're in great shape. We don't need, like some of what we're seeing in Europe, which is regulation that's stifling innovation in Europe.
Okay, Shawna, you said Berkeley is a diverse community, right? So I'm sure you have people on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, we
What's
do.
the conversation?
And so, there's a couple of different things that we're doing. And I think one thing that we're doing is we're piloting a lot of tools, right? So it's always great. You want to get those early adopters on board with playing around with different platforms and having them be the ones that go out to the faculty who maybe have a little more fear about this, and to teach them about the value of how you can leverage AI for whatever their discipline is. So this is something, having those faculty advocates has been our primary focus. The second thing, though, that I really love about Berkeley is open source everything, and our students create all these platforms, Ally, Gradescope, all of them, right? And so our students, they are creating platforms. And so we're really making space for our students to come in and talk to us and to talk to faculty about what these platforms are that they're creating. So just recently we had a group of students, for example, who want to create sort of a discovery platform that uses AI to help identify where they might want to be interested in activities on campus. This seems like such a simple thing, but we're so decentralized. Every college and every department is just doing their own thing, and so it's really difficult for students to find their way and navigate across campus. So these really smart students created their own application to actually do that. So we really rely on students and faculty early adopters. And then the third thing, and I touched upon this in my talk earlier today, is really reassuring people they're not alone in their fear, anxiety, nervousness around AI. And I often hear people say, kind of the first thing out of their mouth when you start talking about AI is, well, I'm not an expert on AI, but I've been playing around, blah, 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 and I really try to coach my staff, and I often speak to this. We're all learning about AI, and yes, there are experts in the field of AI, but in terms of teaching and learning and the place that we're in right now, we're all beginning on this, and we're all starting to learn. And I think as soon as you kind of reassure faculty in that capacity, they just feel better, And I even say, I'm the Cato, and I feel like, I'm not an expert in AI at all, And so really making sure that my staff who interact in our Center for Teaching and Learning with faculty are using that type of language, I think is really important.
Let me add one thing I forgot, which kind of goes to what both of you said, and that's the transparency aspect of it and the learning about it. In our AI Allo Institute, one of our work streams is on ethics of AI, and it's led by a philosophy professor. And we try to be very open with saying, hey, there are ethical considerations here that we're having to explore. And so we actually have helped lead these ethical considerations of AI for all of the National AI Institutes as well.
What's interesting to your point too, I think November 30th of 2022, my birthday, OpenAI launched, right? Like Tuesday for me to remember. OpenAI launched, and rarely do you have a technology that is so broadly adopted that creates a level playing field, whether you're in a developing country, whether you're in an advanced country, whatever language you speak.
Coder or not coder.
Coder or not
Right,
coder.
exactly.
Everybody, like it created a level playing field. And what's so interesting is, I was in Mexico last week and said essentially, you are in the exact same place as a lot of institutions in North America or in Europe because we all started from the exact same jump off. And that's really powerful model.
Yep, it is.
So the governance was mentioned earlier. I think, Stephen, you said, we haven't done governance, or maybe you, Shawna. This is an interesting one, right? Because you have this democratization of a tool that really levels the playing field. You have incredible innovation that's moving at the speed of light, both in terms of how fast the models are developing, but also how people are thinking about how to use these tools. I have some people working in the entertainment space that's going to freak out the movie industry, in my lab. And then we need governance, we need policy. How are you all managing kind of the stretch of that in your respective, and Ryan, for you, let me let you go first here. What are you seeing people do in terms of, do we put governance around this? Do we let 1,000 flowers bloom? How do we rein it in? Is it guardrails? What are you seeing?
It is literally every piece of the spectrum, right? And I did a webinar with MIT, and they said we're intentionally not providing any guardrails, any restrictions, anything that might foster or stifle innovation. We're not going there. And then you've seen institutions that are putting on very specific guidelines, really cranking it down and trying to control it. Luckily, we're not seeing those bans still in place anymore that you talked about. I mean, it was pretty alarming that they were saying, we're going to ban ChatGPT. The funny part is, how many different AI tools are out there that students can turn to? It was like blocking student cell phone usage on campus, right? It's just not possible. And so to see that shift has been really, really interesting.
Ryan, go one level deeper in terms of the organizations that are saying we're not gonna put guardrails around this thing. What's their rationale for that? Why is that the right answer for them?
I think usually they're highly innovative institutions, or institutions like MIT, like Berkeley, like Stanford, like the ones that are core at their heart, they're driving innovation, and they see those guardrails of any kind as stifling that. And I think other institutions, it's not that they're not innovative, it's that the fear of losing control. I think everybody has that fear that they'll lose control of their AI and it'll be the first one to become sentient and launch the missiles, right? Like there still is that kind of irrational fear around AI, and I think that's why so many still feel they need to provide guidance. The best provide great training, provide templates around course language and things like that, but most of them really are focused on letting the educator make the decision within their classroom on the use of AI and communication around AI.
Okay, Shawna, how about for you?
Yep, 1,000 flowers are blooming on our campus right now. Yeah, so definitely you hit it right on the money. For us, it's letting people innovate at this point in time.
Is there guardrails? Are there principles of use?
Well,
I mean, what kind of things do people?
Yes, I did want to talk about that because you mentioned this, and that there is privacy and security policies that apply to AI. I mean, they apply to everything, right? And so, for example, our Office of Ethics has really looked at our privacy and security policies and plugged AI into that same language.
So they didn't create new language. They said, let's plug
they're
into
saying,
existing.
look at this is our security, this is our policy on data privacy, and these are the things when you're using AI that apply to that, right? Or that AI applies to this, whatever. But yes, so they're really, those policies still exist, and so And people, I think, sometimes are trying to reinvent the wheel. We had for a while there, people like, oh, we need to have an AI policy. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, not yet, I don't feel like. And I think we really need to take advantage of what currently exists to sort of ensure that we're protecting the privacy of our students. And then I think there's a whole ethical component of being very transparent with students about when we're using AI, being transparent about what data is going where, and letting students have a say in how they feel about that. So
I tell people, it's like we just got done arguing over data governance, and now you want to start arguing over AI governance? Please no.
yes.
Stephen, how about
We're largely the same. So, it's up to the instructors. Instructors can decide at the individual level, or sometimes at the program level for that. But I think we have got a set of policies that are broad enough to incorporate new technologies. But very importantly, something, Ryan, you said, we are doing a lot of training of our Center for Teaching and Learning has been great at, here's sort of current state of best practices of AI. Here's some things to think about with that. One of the things we're finding that's always difficult for faculty to think about is assessment. Because our assessments, as I referenced earlier, a lot of times they're not measuring what we really need them to be measuring, and AI exacerbates that problem. So thinking about, making people rethink about how you do assessment and what you're assessing is a big part.
The conversation around disclosure too, I think, is really interesting and important. If I'm an educator and I use AI to build my rubric or other course materials, do I need to disclose that to my students? Do my students then need to disclose every time they use it? The disclosure conversation is
Super interesting.
pretty interesting.
It's an interesting one, and it is individual to a certain level, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that you can mandate those disclosure things. You might be able to, frame it.
Yeah.
But
and even how do you provide the access to tag that as, oh, this was augmented by AI. This was within a virtual course space. How do you even surface that?
One of the places where I do see some governance or more policies being created is really around technologies like Google and Zoom that are implementing AI tools that aren't specific to teaching and learning but are used across campus. And so right now we're having a kerfuffle on our campus because our central IT turned on Zoom AI functionality, for example, and a lot of people are very upset about that because there wasn't faculty consultation and we don't know what the impact is on instruction. And so, we're going to roll that back, but we're learning, I guess is what I'm saying. And I do see the potential for that sort of space where you have these tools that are used by faculty, staff, and students really being the place where we're going to have some language around how do we serve all of these different bodies around the implementation of AI, and how do we regulate that?
And as a vendor, we're looking at, okay, we're going to develop some AI features, but we've got LTI partners that are going to be plugging their features in. We've got schools that want to build their own large language models and manage those. How does that plug in? We realize we're just part of that larger ecosystem.
You're part of an ecosystem,
so how do we make it as
right?
open?
Yeah.
And that's, obviously pertinent to everybody in the room, that openness, that interoperability is key. Otherwise, you're going to have these firewall tools.
all right, I am coming out to you. I envisioned this being a room about 1/3 of this size when I came up with this idea. So Rob, thank you. And so this may be, something I'm out of breath about halfway through, but Okay, so we're turning over to this mic. I am looking for the brave first soul who's got a question for our panelists. Anything you'd like to ask about? Here we go. Thank you, sir. Tell us where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Cliff Fleeing. I'm with the Utah State Board of Education. I'm wondering if any of you have looked into any sort of precision-based LLMs or applications like Research Rabbit or something like that that's intended for the sole purpose of trying to make verifiable documents and verifiable answers.
So we have not really done what you've said, but we've taken some of our existing work, as I mentioned in AI Allo, like the Jill Watson stuff, and used that as a back end where we have the LLMs as a front end. And what the neural nets and some of our machine learning algorithms do is verify the content for that. So we understand that to be a real issue and are doing it, but we haven't looked at the ones you mentioned.
So I'm curious about this, right? Because I do some work with healthcare, and there are some, let's call it curated language models that are being that are being developed. MedPalm by Google is one that's going to have a lot of popularity with the healthcare community. Do you think we're going down a road where we'll see curated specific domain assets that are developed and become kind of best in class? Maybe the client scientists get together and do that. Do you think that'll be a trend that we see in education?
I mean, I think we already see where you're taking large language models and limiting the data they have access to, whether it's an individual course or whether it's trusted databases. You know, we see some of our partners doing that. We've looked at doing that. It's interesting because I think we'll see just a myriad of those different applications. But I mean, I think in the future you get to the point where you've got a large language model running for every single class. All it knows is that class. All it has access to is that class, and it's mirroring the style of the educator itself, and makes an ideal tutor. There's no fear that it would become morphed into something else because it doesn't know anything else except that bubble.
So that would be defined by the instructor and then made known in the syllabus, just like providing a set of reading lists.
Yeah.
But now it's providing a model.
And that opens up the path for personalization.
Yep.
You know, understanding what the student knows and doesn't know in very specific ways that are really hard to do at scale.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about intellectual property, and Berkeley faculty are very focused on intellectual property. And I could see the potential of them really wanting just to contain information in their own space. Now, they'd have to feel secure about that, but I could see them hesitating to use large language models in their courses that extend outside the parameter of what they are specifically addressing in their class.
Yeah. We talk a lot about PII for students. The IP for educators really is
It's a thing.
as big a concern.
I think that's where the AI market's going in general, by the way. One of the things that differentiates professions is epistemology, how you think about something.
Yep.
And we'll start to see it, I think we are seeing it already with some of the current AI models, the way, tell me what an engineer would think about this, or tell me what an English professor would think about that. And so, you know, we'll see a variety of those sorts of models.
Yes.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Michael Feldstein from eLiterate, and you just gave me the perfect segue for my question, which is how someone thinks about something. We all develop mental models for different tools we use in different aspects of our lives. My wife is 10 times smarter than me about most things, but she doesn't have a good mental model of her computer. So when things go wrong, she gets very frustrated and distrustful. On the other hand, she has a much better mental model of the human body than I do. So when someone gets sick, I always turn to her in fear and, you know, look for help. And neither one of us has a good mental model of how our car works. When it comes to generative AI, we're told on the one hand it works a lot like your type ahead on your phone, and on the other hand, nobody understands how it works. So it's difficult for users to come to some sort of mental model about pattern matching and completion that is common to these generative AI that might make it more predictable to them and a little less scary and give them a little bit more power. What are you all doing in all the various activities that you're engaged in with literacy and experimentation? What are you doing to help people develop better mental models of what the software does?
I like your conversation about using AI to help AI explain
Yeah.
what's going on. Right?
Well, that gets to the theory of mind conundrum, which is a well-known thing in AI that people are trying to figure out. How do you develop these series of minds? There's a book called, I think it's called 1,000 Brains, and I can't think of the author right now. But he talks about the neocortex. So our brain has a cortex, which is like our old dinosaur brain that's been around forever. And then the neocortex is the human brain part. And in the neocortex, all of the neurons are identical. Whereas in the cortex, the old brain, the neurons are highly differentiated. And you can tell the difference between this type of neuron and that type of neuron. And some of the thinking is, well, the neocortex, we haven't had enough time evolutionarily for those neurons to differentiate. And what the book, The 1,000 Brains premises, is that there must be a very simple algorithm, because in 75% of our brain is the neocortex. So there must be a very simple algorithm that we're using to make all of these very similar neurons work in different ways. And so his thinking is that that's kind of what LLMs do, is there's this relatively simple algorithm that gives rise to these amazing answers that are out there. We don't understand it yet. As to what we're doing about that is the theory of mind. So we're really working on how do you develop these theories of mind.
So, just want to let you know. Go, Shawna, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in one thing that I think is important to that particular question, and it's broader. One of the things that we've been implementing in my unit is a futures framework. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard of futures thinking or Institute of the Futures, who we sort of partner with around this. And futures thinking is really a way of developing foresight about all the potential futures that could happen 10, 20 years from now. And you also use hindsight to do that, and then you look across the landscape and look for markers of change, signals of change that are happening. In order to try to be able to be more resilient to the future and to train your staff and make sure you have the skill set to respond to potential changes. It sounds kind of heady and wild, but once you start learning about a futures framework and becoming a futurist, suddenly that crazy future that's really frightening feels manageable, and you feel like you have agency in that future. And so it's something that I implemented this during the pandemic for my organization because people felt so doomsday about the future. And all the folks that are in our first futures cohort, in fact, have become very active in the futures world and have a much more positive mindset about the future. So I just wanted to put in a plug for that because I do think there's a new way we have to think about the world, and I think a futures framework is a really solid way of doing that.
I'm from Houston, Texas. I was wondering if you could assume the role of a higher education expert in technology and develop a minor in your colleges that would be AI, designed to give your students durable skills that complement their major, or an industry-based certification in K-12 that complements the diploma in order to meet the needs of falling employment levels in college graduates currently, and how they can become more hireable by companies that are trying to meet this enigmatic AI skill goal.
Who wants to start on that one? I can start on it because this actually intersects kind of with my role, right? Is getting past that the end goal is walking across the stage to get a piece of paper and realizing that most children who choose to go to college go to get a good job and to build enough income to create their own independent life. So we started really talking about how do we embed a competency-based model into kind of every class that we've got going on, which some institutions have had. We're on the beginning of that journey. But then really working with NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers, to say, we need to focus on this competency model, and I love the term durable skills because they get used over and over in whatever job that we have. We need to really map that and understand our learners across that continuum. And for us, we're really talking about that continuum isn't after they leave us with the core degree that they came for, but can we build a model that says the lifelong learner is going to have to keep coming back to upgrade that skill set and that competency base. So we're really thinking of it as really a lifelong learner opportunity for us. And then getting back to the ideas that Stephen talked about the individual tutor, it's not just for the learning exercise, it's really for the career readiness and the career evolution that's probably going to follow us or the next generation through all their jobs. But what are your other seeing in your respective spaces?
I mean, I think your point there about lifelong learning and shifting our mindset away from a K-16 or a K-20 view of the world into a lifelong learning view of the world is incredibly important right now. We don't work 30 years and then retire with a pension anymore. We stay 3 to 5 years at every job. We are constantly learning and upskilling and reskilling to either to advance in our careers or change pathways. We as software providers need to support schools' journeys to support students as they come back and revisit. It's hard if you drop out at 3.5 years of coursework in a 4-year degree program, you essentially have nothing to show for that. And so there's schools that are looking at models of how do we provide incremental credit, whether it's certificates or stackable credentialing, so that if you go for 2 years and then you drop out, A, you've got something to show for it, but B, once you're measuring it at the skill level, it's much easier to come back and re-engage. Here's what you know, here's where you can start, whether it's with the institution you were with or otherwise. So I think as a vendor, that's something that we're trying to figure out how to support better, and then I think ultimately transparency on pathways to well-paying jobs is key. I think we see people that, some students are very focused on what they're going to make when they graduate and what the career path looks like. Others are not. And so how do we provide tools for all of them to help them get a degree that will get them a job?
I'll echo the importance of the lifetime learning, and we're working very hard on some of that. And part of that is there's always a conflict, isn't there, between skills-based education and durable skills. With employers oftentimes saying, well, I need somebody that is ready day one, and they can do this. If I'm going to hire a supply chain logistics engineer, and they tell me, well, I'm really good at creativity and collaboration, I say, well, what do you know about supply chain logistics? And they don't have any answer. I'm not going to hire them. But then I'm also probably not going to promote them 5 years from now if they don't know anything about collaboration and creativity and those sorts of things. So it's a balance, and I think there's a lot of learning we have to do both on the supply and the demand sides of that.
And I just want to add that I am less worried about the competency of students around AI. I know there will be competency around this that is coming out in K-12 education. I don't mean to sound like, and they're going to learn on their own, right? They're playing with AI. I am much more concerned about AI literacy of faculty, because they do stay at their jobs for a really long time and are very narrowly focused in their disciplines, and there's not a lot of opportunity for us we can't force them to learn about AI or have AI literacy, right? So that's the area that I'm thinking about, and I have concerns about. Staff are really excited about learning about AI, and I think students will want to learn about AI, but that's the segment of the population that I'm worried about.
Yeah, and the number of times I've heard we're going medieval on them over the last year and a half is alarming, right? Who wants to go back to handwritten essays that then you as an educator have to grade, let alone put your students through that? These are digitally native students. Their handwriting's terrible, right? Why would you want to do that to yourself? And there's other methods for addressing that. But there are those people that are digging their heels and don't understand that this will be ubiquitous.
And at the hotel this week, there's a whole host of people grading AP exams.
I know. We should go talk to them.
You should ask them about that.
Let's go talk to them.
Would actually be interesting.
Hi, I'm Sanjosh. I'm from Kennesaw State University, Georgia. So everybody talked about data governance, how it's going to hinder with creativity. But one thing I would like to ask the panel, what thing do you think like AI should not be used when it comes to education sector? But if it have to be used, what are the guardrails we should be having? And the second part to the question is because everybody thinks AI is like a magical wand, everything should happen like that. But if you have that power, if one problem you could solve with AI overnight in the educational sector, what would that be?
Well, I would say that the one is plagiarism, and that's not a reason not to use AI. But AI is just really not very good at coming up with some of the things that you write. My wife is a chemistry teacher at Emory University, and she gave an exam where she had one of the options for doing the exam was you could use AI to do the exam. But when you did use the AI, the focus of the exam was to really talk about the processes that you use the AI, as we talked about earlier. Well, only 4 people chose that option, and they all did a good job. But she could tell by reading the exams that maybe 10 or 12 of the students had used AI, because it was really, really boring what their answers were that came in. And so I think we've got to instill, if we could stop something, is copy and paste. Let's eliminate copy and paste from the AI programs. And not make it be that simple.
I would say it's not necessarily specific to education, but the deep fake is the one thing about. I'm terribly optimistic on AI. The deep fake piece scares me, and it's not just its ability to create lifelike videos of public figures saying things they shouldn't say. It's actually people's ability to discern that, and I think even with some of the basic kind of deep fake stuff that we've seen up to this point, people really struggle with understanding that. When it gets more advanced, it's going to be alarming, and that's the one thing that actually scares me.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Fake news, all of that is really changing our society, and that's something that's deeply concerning, and that AI, of course, has made more prevalent.
Well, getting back to our next question here. A familiar face.
Hi everyone, I'm Linda. I'm with D2L. First of all, thank you for this wonderful forum. This has been a really great conversation. I do recall, I think, other conferences where it just felt a little bit less interactive, and so I really enjoy and appreciate the conversational nature of this. One of the things that I have so many questions, by the way, but I'm just gonna ask one. One article, actually, that my esteemed colleague sent me the other day kind of alarms me. It's about bias in the AI decision making. So the VA uses a suicide prevention algorithm to decide who gets extra help, and apparently it is favoring white men and ignoring sexual harassment. And so I'm just curious, in this group, what are some of the strategies that you've been thinking about to try to mitigate bias and understand and expose the bias that is there?
That's a great question, and something that has really hit us. So, for example, in the Jill Watson thing we talked about earlier, in that class, the students had introduced themselves, and this one guy in the class said, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm really excited about the class. I'm nervous about it, though, because my wife is about to have a baby, so I know I'm going to be really busy." And Jill Watson said, "Oh, welcome to the class. We're so excited about your growing family, and we hope we can do whatever we can to support you." And then a woman came in and said, "I'm excited about the class, too, but I'm nervous because I'm about to have a baby." And Jill Watson said, "Welcome to class." Because Jill Watson had never experienced female, much less a pregnant female, in its training data set for that. And that really hit home that to us. That creating that training data set is so important that it makes a huge difference in what outcome you have with AI. So I think A, being aware of it is very important, and B, being able to examine your training data to see what biases are in there.
I mean, I think that's if you ask, there was a study done, if you ask a lot of the graphics generating tools, just give you a picture of a CEO for an American company, it gave you a white male, right? And repeatedly. So it's these underlying biases that we try to eliminate. In some cases, access to the databases can control some of that. But I think being aware of it, to your point, understanding that it has those tendencies and we can't always do something about it, does let us lean into trying to figure that out, or at least being aware of when it does create those. So it's a great question. There's not, I don't think, an easy answer for that one at this point, other than looking at the training data and trying to account for that.
Or building an AI to look at the training data for other
Yeah,
AIs.
I mean, that's, and actually I think that's been done.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the article, I'll look it up, Linda. But there is an AI that's being trained to look for bias in other AIs and flag that. And so, yeah, there's some interesting work.
Here's a very pragmatic follow-up, which is, the more you play with these tools, the more you start to learn that the power of prompting and good prompting can make a difference. Do you believe that better prompting can address biases or address or overcome biases that have been in the training data? Early stage question, we're only in stage 2 of the Tour de France, but I'm curious what you all think.
Well, no, I don't think so, because if the data set's not there, you can prompt the AI what you're after all it wants to, and it just doesn't have that information. So now what we're seeing increasingly, they're looking at training GPT-5, I think it is now, and it has, I forget how many billion parameters, so they're building these all-encompassing training sets. So currently not, but hopefully in the future.
Yeah, I do think there's iterative changes, though. Like if you get a response and you see that bias in the response and you're aware of it, I think then you can go back and try to tease a better answer out of it. But if you're not actually looking for or aware of that bias in the first place, I think you're somewhat limited in what you can do.
Yeah, I would say that, this is all a part of AI literacy. That is a huge part of it, is really knowing what kind of prompts are the right type of prompts to get the answers that you want. But I also feel that we need to be doing research, that individuals need to do research. They need to play with this and find their own biases in when they're using ChatGPT, for example, so that they understand when they're coming out. But I also think that we need the academic community to be doing research on this more holistically as well, and they are. We just don't, it just takes time, so.
Okay, we got a lull in the action here, so I'm going to throw the next question to the group, which is, one edtech has played an amazing role in terms of setting standards to drive interoperability. Rob covered that in terms of the early years. What do you believe the role of standards around AI needs to look like as we look to the future?
Well, one, just what we were talking, right? Standards in the data sets that you train, standards in the training data. So one of the standards may have something to do with incorporating diverse perspective in the training data.
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of it is, building on the LTI integrations, like making sure that AI tools have the plumbing within LMS software, other softwares, to work seamlessly, whether it's a third-party LTI tool, whether it's a school's large language model. I think that's kind of the underlying piece for me. I don't know, that necessarily how you'd standardize.
Yeah, I would say also just around policies associated with data privacy and security would be an area of standard.
Yeah.
Ryan, for our K-12 participants in the audience, what's your advice to them at this stage, in terms of where they're at, how to create the next conversation, and all of that?
I think Shawna's point around AI literacy, both for students and educators, is huge. I think introducing that earlier for younger students, for more educators, because these are kids that, again, they're digitally native. They pick up a screen as soon as they can interact. I mean, they get phones when they're 10 or 11 years old and are plugged in. They need to understand the bias. They need to understand when things are being AI generated. And so the more training we can do, even if it's just, hey, go give them a 5-step process to go out and play with ChatGPT so that they feel better about using it and understanding the results it would give them. Open those doors and try to dispel that fear. That's huge. But I think a standardized AI literacy program across the country would be pretty amazing. And to that end, the Department of Education's Office of Learning Technology has released some guidance. There's a really great report that outlines, raises awareness, provides some guidance on when to use AI. That would actually be incredibly helpful for educators to have in hand.
So here's a question about kind of like deep fakes and maliciously falsified data. How do you feel about non-maliciously falsified data? Like a very popular website recently has sprinkled in AI enhancements into results, and some of those have not been accurate. And I thankfully have certain tools in some domains of knowledge to falsify that data myself. How do you feel about getting that in front of learners, especially in the K-12 realm?
I mean, we really push human in the loop AI, so making sure that a human is always if you were creating something using AI, it never is the final result, right? The human has to go through and edit it. I also think, we look at 3 key principles like intentional, safe, and equitable. How do we make sure that we're solving real problems? How do we make sure that we're safe and aligned with the regulation? But then how do we make sure that we're not opening equitability gaps with costs and things like that? And beyond that, I don't know, at some extent they're going to be exposed to those pieces. I think the literacy aspect of it, understanding when they're seeing those results, when they're getting AI generated content, is key. Again, I like LinkedIn is one of those tools that's done a good job of you wrote a post. Do you want AI to make it better, right? Rarely does it actually better, but sometimes you're like, I kind of got to work that, right? That's a great tool because it gives you the option. It says, hey, this is how AI would have written that same thing. Use it or don't, right? And there's always that lever that the human gets to pull.
I also think norming around guiding principles is really important. Every institution should have guiding principles that you are constantly, when I say norming, that you're talking about, that you're teaching about, they're a part of your literacy programs. I do think that is something that's really important and that will help in some of these situations.
That is an outstanding point. My son, who's 13, he said, I don't understand why I can use Grammarly, but I can't use ChatGPT. And we make a lot of assumptions about what they know, and I think we need to take a step back and dispel that, and don't assume they know anything, and really reiterate on those ethical use cases, positive use cases, use it to enhance learning, not avoid learning, that kind of thing.
And one of the durable skills maybe is skepticism.
Yeah,
Right?
That's a great point.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I love that. That's great.
Well, that's a great segue. Hi, my name is Kate. I'm from the California State University system. And I was going to out myself as a bit of an AI skeptic. And I think when you have the peak of the hype cycle, you have that kind of utopian, dystopian perspectives on the outcome. But I'm worried about a more boring third possibility, which is that it just kind of goes the way of email. That this idea of productivity and more for more's sake, if you want a human in the loop, like, I'm worried we're going to end up in a situation where it's like, well, you're double booked for a meeting. Your AI agent can go to all of them for you, and you don't have time to read. Your AI can read all these things for you, but you still are the limiting factor as the person who still has to make meaning of all the information. So I guess my questions are: one, what do you think of that as a possibility? And two, as a leader in your organization, how do you create the culture around productivity such that it's around better outcomes and not just more in terms of quantity?
We've actually heard that described as the AI loop.
Yeah.
Students using AI to generate content to be graded by educators using AI to grade it, right? And nobody actually learns in the process. That is a fear.
It reminds me of Real Genius, right, where the professor's recording their lecture and the students all have the tape recorders on. And back to another 1980s.
Good. That is a good Val Kilmer movie reference.
There you go.
But it's a systemic societal issue, isn't it? And so we may have to restructure the way we think about society now. There's a great philosophy book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And it really is about teaching us to create culture around the things we enjoy. And sometimes you have to learn about those things. Like a lot of people, most people probably don't appreciate opera the first time they hear it. They have to learn about opera a little bit to do that. Our culture now is about work, it seems like. So I think it's a very broad issue that it may take some serious societal thinking.
I think a lot about productivity from the perspective of faculty who are and I talked about this earlier today, they are so overstretched now. And I think it's true in the CSU as well as in the UC system and probably other public institutions around security, accessibility. There's so many trainings that they have to take, and the world is changing, and for them, it's a big challenge to find time to learn AI, to be more productive, maybe, right? And I don't know what the answer is to that other than to say that I think this is where communities of practice can be really helpful. One edtech has an AI preparedness checklist that I absolutely love, that has been incredibly beneficial to me and is allowing for me to go and advocate to campus leadership. We need to make more space for faculty to learn about AI so that we're not taking time away from them, but we're actually giving them space to learn about AI, and so that we can then assess whether or not it's going to be more productive. But it's really hard to make a case for something to be more productive when you're spending a lot more time doing it on top of all the 100 other things that now we have to do. But I do think AI might help with some of those other 100 things like accessibility.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would say that we've pushed people to do their own kind of personal productivity hacks first, right? It helps in the learning process. It's very internalized before they start thinking about how do we take AI into our workflow or our processes. I'll share a story from healthcare. So we had a pilot group for healthcare basically write their summaries back to patients with the use of an AI tool. Now, the average doctor in America, you see patients all day, maybe you see patients in exam rooms for 10 hours, you go home, you have dinner, and then you spend 2 to 3 hours writing patient summaries, documenting your notes and writing your summaries. So we gave them a tool to do that. And then we said, patients, give us some feedback on the summaries. So here are some of the differences. Here's what we learned from the exercise. The average doctor writes 4 sentences. We trained the AI assistant. It wrote typically 4 paragraphs. We asked it to write for 6th grade language. Patient said, I can understand what was written here, what the doctor sent to me. Sometimes I understand it, but they use jargon I don't understand. And then we said the big one, right? Well, 2 big ones. First one was, which wrote a more empathetic message back to you? And after you've worked a 10-hour day, shove down your dinner, then have 2 more hours of work, empathy may not be the top of your list. The bot was more empathetic in the patient's mind.
Wow.
But then we asked the doctors, did you save time? The answer was no, they didn't save time. But it did save cognitive load, because writing 4 sentences from nothing and reading 4 paragraphs and adjusting, human in the loop before I hit send, was the same amount of time. But the mental, load on my brain was a lot less, and that I appreciated. You need to do the exercises to understand where the real benefit comes and who will receive the benefit. And that's why these experiments are so important.
Yeah.
Okay, we are out of time for today, but hopefully we created a great conversation for you, had some thoughts generated in your mind. Now it's time for us to go downstairs and maybe share those with colleagues and have some conversation. But please join me in thanking our panelists for today.